Are you considering divorce? Are you dealing with it now? Are you on the other side and not sure what comes next? You've come to the right place. Welcome to the Divorce Do's and Don'ts Show with your host, Lisa C. Decker.
Welcome, everyone, to the Divorce Do's and Don'ts Show. I'm Marcella Cripe, Lisa Decker's Girl Friday and right-hand man. Lisa is our host, and she is a certified divorce financial analyst and also a real estate collaboration specialist in divorce. Lisa is also the CEO and founder of Divorce Money Matters and the organization that brings you this show, Divorce Town USA. We're very proud to have this episode today, and we're happy to have you, Lisa. What can we expect today?
Thank you so much, Marcella. As we close out National Mental Health Month, we wanted to dedicate today's show to a very important topic, and that is a rainbow divorce, or when an LGBTQ couple faces separation or divorce. And this is a topic that doesn't get talked about enough, but there's a lot of families dealing with this, so we're happy to be bringing you this information today. And we'd like to welcome two special guests and colleagues, Jillian Blum and William Smith. Will is a licensed clinical social worker, a registered mediator, forensic health, mental health evaluator, and a forensic social worker. He graduated with his master's degree in clinical social work from the University of Washington in Seattle in 2012, and he specializes in marriage and family therapy. He has also completed his postgraduate training at the Gottman Institute in Seattle and the Woods Fellow Institute for Couples Therapy in Atlanta. Now, Jillian is a licensed professional counselor, a trained mediator, and co-founder of the Atlanta Marriage and Mediation Clinic. Dr. Blum has a PhD in counselor education and supervision from Penn State University. Her research interests have included analyzing family life cycles, parenting experiences, multicultural concepts, addiction, and LGBTQ topics. Her clinical specialties include marriage and family counseling, life transitions, gender identity, and mood disorders. She has postgraduate training that includes a Gottman Institute, discernment counseling, EMDR, and CBT. And when she's not doing all of that and working, she enjoys playing table tennis and being a foodie. Oh, I'm with you on the foodie stuff. So this is great. We have two wonderful guests with us today, and we're going to be discussing a lot of things that need to be talked about out there in the world. And today you're going to get it straight from the sources. So welcome to our guests.
Hey, Lisa. Great to see you as always.
Well, thank you so much. We're so excited to have you both today. So I'm going to let you guys, I'm going to ask the questions. I'm going to let you both answer as you feel you can to the questions. And we're just going to have a really nice conversation about this very hot topic that's going on. So my first question is, are there differences in the rate of LGBTQ divorces and opposite sex divorces? Jillian, do you want to start with that one?
Sure, absolutely. Yes. A little bit of my academic is kind of coming back with this one. The long and short answer that I kind of have is we're not exactly sure yet. It's been like kind of like the findings have honestly like kind of been all over, and that's been a lot of like the issues is because prior to getting legalization, it's been a little bit of like apples to oranges, because a lot of like the former research has looked at civil unions or cohabitation. And so what we find in the research is that legal, kind of togetherness like actually helps to keep people together more so. So it's not quite apples to oranges. And so the overall kind of sense is that like all the research has kind of shown like, depending on like what research you look at, you get different results. So right now we're wanting more research. They've done some more administrative data, which seems to be better, of looking at like who's actually getting married and then are they getting divorced. And whenever they've done like a 3-year long study, and whenever they did that, it came out that there was really no difference actually, like in the divorce rates. So we don't exactly know prior to this, it's been convenience sampling or snowball sampling. So it's kind of like hard to really actually generalize that to the population. So we just need some more data. But what we do know is that right now, 1 in 10 LGBT folks are getting married, and some of them will perhaps get divorced eventually. So yeah, so that's where we're kind of like at this moment.
Okay, well, this is just developing, and we haven't had a long time that people who are LGBTQ could get divorced, could get married, excuse me. And so we haven't had as long a time to study that, so that makes sense. But just like the general population, people in relationships sometimes split, and it's the same here. So what are the unique challenges that LGBTQ spouses endure that might increase their likelihood of divorce? Are there any?
We've seen some, like, yes, like generally speaking, they have similar stressors, child rearing, financial. What tends to be kind of more unique is what we call like the minority stress hypothesis. And that's where, because of the stigma, perhaps victimization, discrimination, prejudice that some LGBT folks face in society, families, legal system, and clergy, all of that, that it can add more stress onto the relationship in itself. And so sometimes that can cause like kind of more conflict in the relationship, because especially depending on if one partner is more out than the other, it can certainly kind of like add to this like feeling of like it might be kind of like us versus each other versus like us versus like the prejudice in a lot of ways. There's ways that doesn't always happen with every couple, and there's certainly ways, and I'm sure we'll talk about like kind of ways that there can be that can be combated, but that tends to be kind of like a huge thing of what folks have to deal with, though.
Adds another level of stress that heterosexual couples aren't dealing with all of the biases and emotional stuff that comes with trying to manage your place in society, right? And whether you've come out or not. So I understand what you're saying there. Will, how can someone know that it's time to seek mental health professionals during the divorce process? When do you advise people? I know I tell them as soon as they're even, having some marital troubles, it's best to look at having discernment counseling or marital counseling or whatever the case may be. And maybe you can speak to also what's the difference between marital counseling and discernment counseling?
Sure, yeah. Well, so one of the things that is kind of a pervasive problem, not just in the LGBT community, but in marriage therapy in general, a lot of the times it's pretty parallel to any other type of healthcare, really. Basically, the sooner that an issue starts to get looking at, the prognosis is much better. And so we have seen couples who have come in who have basically said something to the effect of, listen, we're here today as basically a Hail Mary. Like, if this doesn't work, then this is probably going to, lead to divorce proceedings, starting the divorce proceedings. So it's super, super nice when couples come in. And to me, and Jillian probably as well, it's music to my ears when couples come in early and they say something like, hey, listen, we're basically in a good place. We're here to kind of, work on kind of a maintenance piece, and we want to iron out problems as they come, and there's not really anything that is a huge loud problem right now, and we want to keep it that way. That's really ideal. Of course, a lot of people wait, and a lot of times when people come in, there is a very serious problem, or there can be, and it adds to, I think, a sense of pressure to everybody involved. And so, to your point, when you ask a question about like, is this for marriage therapy or for discernment counseling or whatever, if people come in and they're at a point where they are genuinely not sure if this is a relationship that they want to stay in, my mind immediately goes to discernment counseling. And so basically what discernment counseling is it's kind of a model of therapy that's been getting traction over the past, I would say, few years. And, it's basically a brief model of therapy. So it's 5 appointments max. Typically the appointment length is 90 minutes. So it's 90-minute appointments. So 5 90-minute appointments, where the only question that they're really looking at is, do you guys want to stay together or not? And so basically in discernment counseling, they present 3 options. One option is, do you guys want to continue how things have been going? They call it the status quo. So do you want to maintain the status quo and not change anything? And a lot of times people obviously don't like that idea. So then they give you the option, do you want to commit to 6 months of pretty serious marriage therapy? And during that time, divorce is supposed to be taken off the table. That can be a lot for some people. I mean, 6 months of marriage therapy in some ways goes by pretty quickly, but in some cases it is a long time. And then the third option that discernment counseling talks about is, do you guys want to really take a good hard look at separation? And so basically the counselor works with the couple to figure out which one of these paths you want to go down. And so if they commit to 6 months of marriage therapy, it's great. If they decide that, look, we're past the point of this being able to be fixed, and we really want to look at, what does this actually look like? We're happy to help with that too. Obviously, divorce is not a pleasant topic for LGBT or heterosexual or whatever. I think that we can make a case that sometimes it actually is the best option. So even though it's hard, sometimes, especially, Jillian mentioned child rearing. In some cases, as far as that goes, that can actually be the best case scenario, is to go ahead. Like if children are watching really toxic kind of environments, that's not great. So there's kind of ways to look at it, but basically, I guess I'll have to say, as soon as possible. Like if people are experiencing marriage problems, I mean, again, LGBT, heterosexual, whatever, the sooner the better, definitely.
I agree with that. It's like any problem, health, whether it's your mental health or your physical health or your finances, be proactive. Don't wait until things become more of a problem. And if you are working with professionals, be a proactive partner, not a passive participant. That's what I have always said in life. This is your life. You don't want to turn things over to someone just and fix my problem. You've got to participate. You've got to do the work. So yes.
Just to kind of piggyback off of that really quickly, sure. Lisa, one thing that I think that people kind of don't realize is that marriage therapy, under the right conditions, can actually be kind of fun and enjoyable. I mean, it's supposed to be a place where people come in and there's some laughter, and you learn things about your partner, and you have constructive conversations. And so I think that there is this notion that marriage therapy is this very intense kind of thing where it's all you do is talk about problems, and yes, I mean, we do look at problems, but in my opinion, especially in the absence of a really serious problem, marriage therapy sessions are actually fairly enjoyable. I think that a lot of clients enjoy the time together, and they do that on an ongoing basis, and that can really mitigate a lot of the serious marriage issues.
I think maybe we can. Maybe we can blame the media for that too, because the way that marriage therapy is always portrayed in the media, it's always quite negative. Actually, it's always you always see them fighting, you always see them, at each other's throats, and that's just the way that we see it in TV and movies. And so I guess just like everything else, including even, the LGBTQ community, is also not always accurately portrayed in the media either. And so this is a really good to be able to talk about it like this, to just so that people can see what's real versus what they're watching maybe in the media.
Sure. Yeah, because like the history of it is couples therapy used to be like kind of interesting, because there was like this notion of, if we get all of our anger out in this moment, then we'll be exasperated and we will then start moving kind of forward. Like that's all we need to kind of do. And so even some of like kind of yesteryear kind of colleagues would actually give people like foam bats and basically be like, you know, like, you're not taking out the trash enough, you're not giving me sex enough, whatever. And they would just hit each other and think like, okay, cool, now you've got that out of your system, we can kind of move forward. When really that just propelled more and more and more density of like of anger, all of that stuff. So we've been able to kind of see of like, okay, like, you know what, maybe it's like more of like kind of getting into the solution. And I agree with Will, you know, and especially kind of like some of the research with LGBT, you know, Q plus is that a lot of times like they tend to have more humor in their relationship, and that tends to lead to more satisfaction. So there is like kind of this, yeah, there is like kind of this daunting of almost like this is a punishment, or this is something that like, oh gosh, we like kind of have to do to kind of, when it can be kind of nice and can be kind of engaging and can kind of help with the longevity, especially if it's, we know in a week we're going to go see Will, and we can kind of, you know, process this in a healthier way than the way that we have been doing.
Nice. It is interesting that what Marcella said, how the media portrays things is so different from what really is happening in the therapist office, right? So how can therapists change that perception? I'm wondering, because you know, I never thought of marriage therapy as fun. Well, I love that idea. How can we let people know this is going to be good?
Well,
we could save more marriages here.
I think it's getting better. I certainly think that it's getting better. I mean, anything that, and this is really kind of a shame in my opinion, because there has been a lot of basically taboo, you know, with the concept of any kind of mental health treatment, and you know, and marriage therapy is certainly included in that, I think. But yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on the circumstances. But we have had couples who come in, and you know, again, we basically, I mean, I actually sometimes will use games, and actually even John Gottman himself, that, you know, who's basically the marriage therapist, like guru, he actually has a card deck that he himself published and sells on his website, and they're funny. I mean, they're fun questions, and they tend to be funny and thought provoking and kind of challenging, and you know, things like that. And so again, in the absence of a really, if somebody were to come in and they were to have like a really serious, you know, problem, you know, you don't really get to see that side of things. But we have plenty of couples who come in, and maybe they come in once a month, and they just have a few things that they really want to look at. I think people forget that like successful marriages, you really understand your partner like inside and out. You understand what's happening in their lives. You understand what's been on their mind lately. You know their history, you know, things like that. And marriage therapy does give a forum to help with that. And again, like healthy couples have fun together, and that we try to bring that into marriage therapy sessions. And you know, again, if it's not always across the board, because again, if somebody were to come in and they were really looking hard at divorce, you probably wouldn't get to see that side of things. But we do have plenty of couples who come in, and you know, again, there lots of laughter, you know, lots of, I think, learning and growth, and you know, it's fairly enjoyable. You know, I want to say that, you know, it's maybe the funnest place in the world, but it's also, you know, probably a lot more enjoyable than people would think.
I'm finding this very, very interesting, you know, having been a certified divorce financial analyst for 14 years, I've never heard anyone say that marriage therapy is fun. So how do we change this perception? I think the world of therapists need to start letting people know that about this. I feel like we've opened up a secret, and it's something that really can engage people if you are marketing this in such a way that, you know, how to strengthen your marriage, how to find more fun and pleasure, and coming at it from a different perspective for all couples of any gender. And I think there's something really missing here in the marketplace. You know, they do have marriage retreats, and I think those kinds of things go on. But I think the therapy industry overall already is trying to overcome the stigma of mental health issues, right? People don't want to be labeled crazy or have personality disorders or all of that. So they avoid therapy when, that's really the best thing that could be helping them. But maybe changing the perception, not even calling it therapy, calling it, have a marriage play date,
Yeah.
and come in and play, right? I think there's something out there for some savvy therapists to get this ball rolling. I hope I'm planting some seeds here. But that's very, very interesting. So there's so much involved in all of this, and I just wonder, do children come into the foray more of causing any issues in LGBTQ marriages versus traditional marriages? Is there, is child rearing more of a problem? Where can we help folks who are of this type of couple to stay together for the benefit of the entire family? Where are their biggest issues?
What we've seen is that like they tend to have like the same kind of process once the child is there, is that there is a decrease in the satisfaction of the relationship in the beginning, but then there is like an uptake of like kind of closeness and all of that. What tends to be kind of is more on like the before the child gets there, of some of the stress of like kind of IVF, adoption, fostering, whichever way that like kind of is chosen, choosing like either surrogate, sperm donation, all of that can be particularly kind of like stressful for the same-sex couple, that maybe the heterosexual couple tends to not have, which on the tail end like ends up being better, because then it's just like kind of like, okay, we are really prepared for this. They've kind of been able to have a lot of like hard conversations about like, how do we want to do this, and so it's more of a methodical thing, but it can be extremely stressful when things are maybe not working, or we have to go through alternative routes, or maybe have some of like the discussions that we weren't anticipating if we maybe had an opposite sex partner as well.
It adds another layer to an already difficult situation. And many heterosexual couples also struggle with not being able to have children, a little bit different situation, but going through those same types of situations with surrogacy and IVF and all of that. So how about child rearing? Do you see any differences in the different communities that leads to any stressful problems?
I would say basically the answer to that is no. I do think that some of the kids, by virtue of having same-sex parents, probably do, especially, and I kind of hate to say this, but especially in different places in Georgia, I think that there could be more of a potential for a bullying situation or something like that. It can be, I think, hard for kids ish in some places. Now we've seen some great places. Decatur is fantastic. Jillian and I have an office in Decatur, and Decatur is a very, very accepting community, which is great. I guess if the question is, do LGBT families have kind of fundamentally different ways of thinking about how do they raise their kids? I would think that the answer to that would basically be no. Jillian may be a better person to answer that. Is that what you see as well?
Yeah, kind of like accurate, especially if it was like kind of the original thought was like that there must be something kind of like different, or that the lack of one sex or one gender will lead to like kind of issues, and we just don't see that. They're very much thriving children, all that. And what really kind of helps is like the sense of community, the sense of what are the policies around that, what are the is there no tolerance policy, like kind of in the upbringing of at the school systems especially, so that there's not as much kind of like internalized kind of shame of like, I am different in this, but really being more inclusive in this. It tends to be kind of more so how is society kind of reacting to the family than really what is going on within the family.
And to Jillian's earlier point, that's, you know, just kind of yet another example of where these kind of unnecessary stressors really kind of come into the mix and can be taxing on LGBTQ families. So that's just, I wanted to mention that as well.
It does seem like most, like what you've been saying, is that a lot of the stressors and a lot of the issues that maybe in these families is coming from the outside rather than the inside. They're still going to have all the same problems, but now they're also dealing with a lot of outside, similar to the way interracial couples probably sometimes, depending on where they live, still have to deal with from the outside stigma, not the inside.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with like kind of like the social support of things, like kind of how religion, how family kind of reacts to them as well and stuff like that. So yeah, there's a good point of like kind of how job security, what all that looks like, and particularly kind of like are these threat to the family unit in some ways. Sure.
And the outside support is so important, regardless of what community you're part of, right? Everyone needs that sense of security that we all bring to each other, whether it's your neighbors, your church members, your school systems, just knowing that people there are understanding and supportive can make life so much easier for everyone and make home life so much easier for children as well. So that's a great point to bring up. Are there resources in addition that, you know, are there organizations that people can reach out to, maybe for things like bullying in school, of children who come from families that are different, right? I mean, today's society, we have all kinds of families, and are there any resources for those who may be watching that they can reach out to?
Sure. PFLAG is great. PFLAG is a great organization to kind of help, especially like with that, like whenever, you know, why representation is so important, to be able to have a sense of connection, to be able to have a sense of belonging in that way, as well as to have advocates in that way. You know, depending on like kind of like where things go, Lambda, like the legal aid also like can kind of help and step in, as well as like GLAD, Trevor Project. All of those things have been like, all these organizations are so amazing and so great, especially whenever it comes to the potential like heightened suicide rates of LGBT youth, all of that. So to be able to like help with that. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of organizations that are out there that can certainly help. Yeah.
We'd love to
Is
get
that something?
a list.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think we're going to say the same thing.
Right.
Is it possible to maybe get a list like that so that people who are coming and watching the show, either live or maybe even later, and they ask that's something maybe we can give them?
Yeah, 100%.
Just a couple of different resources so that they'll have a place to go, and have a number to call. So that is really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. You know, this is what Divorcetown is about. This is what this show is about, giving people information and then somewhere to go to access it. You know, knowledge is power, but you have to take action. And so we want to give you easy action, right? You don't have to go recreate the wheel. We want to be here for you with whatever issues that you're dealing with. You mentioned, Jillian, about suicide rates. You know, I was reading this morning about teenage suicide rates overall have greatly increased since the pandemic. Are we seeing that even more, I would assume, and from the things I've been reading, among the LGBTQ crowd? Are you finding that is happening?
I personally, yes. I'm not sure, like, kind of like, to be honest, I haven't looked into the research, but at least anecdotally, yes. That it's always been like kind of higher with like LGBT youth, and quite significantly, especially, as well as like kind of like some other mitigating factors as far as substance abuse, like, and all of those like kind of like negative parts. So yeah, so and especially if they're with a lot of like kind of LGBT youth, with if there is like kind of a gay straight alliance in the classroom, if there's like another like if there's like kind of support in that, and maybe you're coming from a home that isn't supportive, so I can imagine that isolation has been extremely tough. What's been also like kind of beautiful about a lot of like the internet is that like people get to connect with YouTube, getting to have like with like Discord, all of that stuff, and so I'm sure that that's been helpful to kind of help to continue on with their support. But it can be kind of very, very much a lonely place, and that's just like what like the stats have always been, is that there's just been a higher level of suicide rates, and so I imagine putting more stress into that system is making that just as worse.
Mm. And I would imagine also that parents going through divorce, an LGBTQ divorce, may also heighten that. So or do you have any words to speak to the parents about helping their children, whether they're straight couples or not? It's always a difficult time, but it adds another layer for families of the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, sure. I'll let maybe Will speak to that if you want.
So the question is basically, is there a piece of advice or something like that to give to families? Yeah, I think that basically when we have a practice that, in addition to what Jillian and I do together, that really does a lot of work with kids. And one of the things that we work on in family appointments is to really, and I would think that probably especially in a situation where there's an LBGT, like a teenager or something like that, who's maybe first coming out or something along those lines. Maybe there's suspicions or maybe not. But typically families from day one, the strongest families that we see have always had a kind of an environment where values include that, look, I mean, you make our family better by being a part of it, and unconditional love and unconditional support. And that should not, in my opinion, that shouldn't change, probably especially if somebody were to come out as, LGBTQ as a teenager or younger, or older, I guess. But the idea is that, children need to inherently understand that that they are loved unconditionally, that there's basically nothing that they can do that is going to cause some kind of a hemorrhage and a bond with their parents. And parents, I think, I mean, just to call a spade, I think that a lot of parents do have probably some sort of, may have an issue with that. Like it maybe goes against their values or kind of their expectations of how they thought that their kids were going to grow up or something like that. And it's, in my humble opinion, the parents need to really work on that for them. Like the idea is that you would want your kids to again feel like they can be whoever they want to be and do it in a safe way, where they know that their parents are going to be with them no matter what happens. And it's really the parent's job to do that. So even if a parent does have a bias, and if they do have a bias, hopefully they have kind of the awareness to say like, yes, this is pushing a button for me. But it's really about their ability to compartmentalize that in the sake of their because and Jillian's right. Like, I mean, the suicide rate is for sure higher in that community. And it's also, I mean, even suicide rates to the side, there's other mental health issues that can come with that. And so, a parent's job, I think, is to do their part in raising a family that really understands inside and out that they are wanted, that they are loved, they are free to do what they want. And really, I think that if a parent has an issue with that, hopefully they have the presence of mind to work on that with somebody, or a bare minimum, at least, not show it in front of their kids. That's just kind of off the top of my head, but that's for sure, I think, a very important piece to it. Ideally, I think that parents would be supportive. You know, I mean, that's probably the best case scenario, is that they, you know, parents get involved, they learn, you know, they talk with their kids, you know, things like that. That's probably the best case scenario.
Well, I have had quite a few cases over the years of parents with trans children, young children, it's difficult. This is all new to many of us, right? We're in a new world here, but people are coming out as what they are, and younger, it seems, in my experience. Do you find that this situation is causing divorces for parents who can't deal with it? I'm not saying that is true. I have no evidence, but in the cases that I worked on, that definitely was a divider among the parents. One was accepting, one could not, and it really caused, you know, a lot of problems in the marriage.
I would say, for me, like, I would say that it would be a bigger symptom, or like
Jillian, I cannot hear you. I'm sorry. I think something happened to your mic there.
Let me make sure. Is that better?
A little bit.
A little bit. Oh, goodness. I will move it.
Yeah, I heard a noise a little bit ago, and then suddenly now we can't hear you so well.
Oh, good old technology. You would think like 2 years in, I'd have this all figured out. But yeah, is that any better?
Not so much. Maybe just talk up.
If you speak up. Yeah, if you speak up, it'll be fine.
Okay, I'll start like speaking up. I would say that it can certainly be a factor in that, but I would say that it's more of like, it speaks to like the bigger symptom of that relationship, honestly. That if they're like kind of, because that to me speaks to, we have different values and we don't know how to come to consensus or do the work to kind of see how do we kind of ultimately like support. And so whenever I've seen that, it's been more of like it doesn't feel like things were going merrily and then this happened and all of a sudden it kind of imploded, that it tends to be kind of more of a symptom of the overall you know, kind of cracks in the relationship anyway. Or it can certainly be like a shock and just, but kind of speaks to how perhaps like they solve issues, or that they discuss how to, you know, kind of raise. And so just kind of puts like more of a highlight that there might have been some already cracks in the foundation, honestly.
For those who maybe heard that a little bit better than I did here, want to do a recap. Did you hear that well? Maybe you can give us.
I'll recap for you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I completely agree that if for example, as she said, if a child comes out or is trans or something like that, and the parents don't agree, that probably is because they haven't agreed about a lot of other things up until that point. That there's probably a divide in the value system that has always been there. And so then this was just kind of like maybe the final straw, or maybe it was just the one thing that brought it all to a head. But Jillian said that in her experience, this isn't the first time that they've had a difference of value or a difference of morals or a difference of whatever. But now it's finally coming to a head, perhaps.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. You know, it's a hard world we're in already, and then this community really faces a lot of prejudice, a lot of uphill battles, a lot of bullying in society overall, and we're seeing even more and more divide in our communities right now. Some areas are better, like we're talking about here in Georgia. Will, you mentioned Decatur, more progressive community, but you know, other communities not so much. So apparently, like anything, finding the right community for you and your family will go a long way to making life easier, with this extra level of things that you're dealing with. No matter what it is, find your tribe, right? Find your place in the world where you're going to be comfortable. Don't expect people to change because you move somewhere. move somewhere where people are going to be accepting of you, if that's possible. Along with that, how can firms or practices be more inclusive of this community and folks and their families?
I would say the great place to start is to look at forms, and especially kind of like with that, you know, a lot of times like it will have assumptive of like, okay, we only check yet, you know, like male or female, or just having to assume certain things of being like, okay, what's the name of the husband? What's the name of the father? Certain things that are just like kind of assumptive. So in Will and I's practice, we're very big on looking and making sure that like the forms are like as inclusive as possible, because especially if you've been in a, had a long history or even a short history of got a feeling discriminated against or having prejudice, you're going to be looking out of like what is safe and what is not. And so if I go to a firm and it is, what, you know, who is your husband's name, or, you know, kind of what is, you know, are you male or female, I'm immediately going to be like, okay, that this might not be the most inclusive place in the world. And so being able to make sure that there's like, if somebody calls like that, it's just like, you know, who is your spouse, who is your partner, what is your, you know, what is your gender, being able to kind of like ask more of those and those assumptive things. And even like when there are times, because like in Will and I's practice, like with insurance, with, you know, like kind of forms, all of that, that we have to kind of have like either the dead name identified, you know, or we have to have like the, like, I need your legal sex, in some ways of being very clear that these don't like reflect our values, that this is something that like we are advocating for, to be able to have more inclusive you know, kind of language whenever it comes to the legal system or insurance, any of that, but to really kind of look and being like, okay, how am I also like kind of talking about people whenever they pick up the phone and are saying I'm getting a divorce, that there's not just like this assume of like, oh, if you sound like a female, that I will assume that you have a husband, in those ways.
Good points. And that applies in so many documents out there in the world. And I'm starting to see a little bit of change around that, but it's slow. And but it is starting to happen.
I did want to say too, sorry, Lisa.
Go ahead,
I did want to
Marcella.
say though, that is such a simple thing that more people could do. It's literally changing a few words on a form. That's really not that difficult. It's really not, you know, it's not that, it wouldn't really cost anybody anything to be able to do that. So these are, I think sometimes we tend to make things more complicated than they are. And so even in our practice, for example, for a very long time, we've trained ourselves to just ask for spouses. That's it, partners or spouses. And then the people, you know, whoever your client or potential client is going to tell you who the other person is. And so those are just such simple things that really don't take much.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. And if there are like kind of like, oh, everything is like kind of changing, and mine, I leave every, you know, open and blank, you know, like kind of like what pronouns, like what, how do you want to be preferred as, like all this stuff, so that it really kind of gives the power back to the client, that they get to identify how, you know, how they want to. And yes, and again, it is, and especially even as somebody that is part of the community, that is a huge thing to be able to like kind of look like and not have like that groan of being like, like, you know, I have to, you know, cross out, you know, groom and put bride, or I have to, you know, kind of, you know, well, you know, what does, you know, he think, and being like, okay, I have to kind of like correct that, and putting the work back on me to feel comfortable in this situation, or to, you know, and it just, for everybody involved, it's just better for that to especially be like inclusive, to make, you know, your client feel comfortable, and to be, and it's just, yeah, like you were saying, like just a small thing that really goes a long way of being like, this is something that we are intentionally doing at this moment as well. Yeah.
You mentioned, Jillian, about the pronouns, and I think a lot of people are confused about that nowadays. They don't really understand what is behind all of this. What does it mean when you see someone putting the pronouns there, or no pronouns, or whatever the case may be? There's all different pronouns being used. Could you speak to that for a minute, help clear some of that confusion?
Yeah, absolutely. I love it personally. Like, I think it's like kind of great, especially with gender being such a social construct, and to really kind of like help to represent people that don't necessarily feel male or female, and to kind of get out of like this binary in some ways. And so having like the encompassing of like they them is great, and it's really again like kind of an easy thing to kind of try to incorporate. I know like even with me, like phonetically just didn't, and like grammar wise it was like very difficult, but the intentionality of that, and and to be able for people to identify in the way that they feel that is them is amazing. And so I think it's really important to showcase like what people's pronouns are, to make that a normalized thing so that there's not this alienation. And especially like for people that use their assigned genders pronouns, to really use their privilege in a good way, to be like, you know what, that we're not just going to assume that because of the way that you look that we're just going to have like this certain pronoun. But in a way of like, and I mean there's a lot of like different pronouns as far as like z and zir as well, when really it's just like kind of the great, your first name is Brandon but you go by Dave, that's fair, and really kind of like utilizing this as like that's what people are preferring, and it's fine. And I can be I can be a solid human whenever it comes to them and be able to identify them as such.
Okay. And I understand that. And, everyone wants to feel that they're being seen for who they are. But the pronouns themselves, are they identifying themselves in a way that everyone else can know when you see she and her as that person saying, I'm a heterosexual woman, or I'm a gay woman, or what does it mean? I don't think everyone knows. I'm certainly still a little confused about it, so I'd love to clear the air here.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say like if you see somebody with like a she her pronoun, doesn't really say anything about her sexuality. She could be heterosexual, she could be pan, she could whatever kind of thing. More of like just saying like I am I identify as a female.
I
And
see.
anything with like he him, really nothing to do with like kind of sexuality, or if there's like they them, that I typically might go as like non-binary as well. And so yeah, so more about like kind of like the pronouns identifying their the way that they identify as far as like kind of gender and not so much sexuality.
I see. Okay. Thank you for clearing that up. I think a lot of people are confused about that. It's something new, and we want to be respectful, but if we don't really understand what it's all about just yet, then it's a little difficult. So that's helpful to know. How about attorney firms? When you were talking about firms and practices a little bit ago, I wonder how many attorney firms are being cognizant of this and being sensitive to it. How are you hearing from your clients about this?
At least the ones that we refer to, yes. Will do. Not sure what your experience has been.
No, yeah, I mean that is probably one of the places. I mean, we don't have attorneys that work with us, but when we started the Atlanta Marriage and Mediation Clinic in 2019, the intention was in large part to have it as a haven for LGBTQ people that want to come in, and we have always kind of made it a point, from everything like Jillian said, to forms, to the way that we talk to people on the phone, to the receptionists, to have people feel comfortable from start to finish. I wish I could say that all attorneys do this. I think that a lot of attorneys are basically doing it, or getting much better at it. There's a few that we really like that do a really nice job with that, that we refer people to. And we would certainly hope that a bare minimum, even if attorneys were to make maybe some slip ups on some things, that they would basically be treating people from a fundamentally kind of respectful place. But we have tried to go out of our way to make sure that our clients feel good about that. And some attorneys do a really, I guess it's like anything else, some attorneys really do a nice job, and they're very mindful of that. Some attorneys, I hate to say this, but I will, I don't think that some attorneys get it, and I don't think it's high on their priority list. And so I think that probably Atlanta and maybe some other places around Georgia, and it's probably similar to other places, big cities, and tend to be, I think, more understanding, and the more rural that you get, probably it gets more challenging. But Atlanta is basically a fairly good place for this, I think. So I would hope that most attorneys here would be at least kind of aware of that and cognizant of it.
Yeah, I would think that, there's definitely a market for people who are seeking attorneys that are going to be sensitive to these things. And I know among our network that we have some that are much more sensitive to the situation. I'm curious, Jillian, a question that's been coming to mind, if there's any research done to show if two women versus two men that are married, is there a difference in the divorce rate? Have there been any studies on that? Or other couplings, just is there more pressure either way?
The overall, and again, with like the caveat that the research is fairly new and kind of a variety, the ones that I've seen have actually shown that like gay men tend to stay married longer than gay women, but tend to like kind of value very similar things. It's interesting, like they both, the opposite of like kind of heterosexual marriages is that actually like an egalitarian relationship between the two of them is very, very big on both gay and lesbian coupleship. And so, yeah, so whatever like kind of like leads to higher satisfaction is like, are we making about the same money? Are we doing kind of like the chores? Are we doing the same thing? And so that has been a higher kind of value and priority. And we've seen like kind of higher staying together whenever both lesbian and gay male couples have been surveyed. But yeah, it tends to kind of be generally speaking that like if I guess if you're going to wager bets, it would be on the gay male couple than the lesbian couple to stay together, honestly, at least according to the research.
That's interesting. Any thoughts why among the research?
There's some of that it tends to be kind of like that males might be able to go outside of the marriage typically kind of like more and get like certain like kind of needs met also, and that they're not having children as much, so that there's like there's not that like kind of like added stress as well, whereas like kind of with like lesbian couples there is a little bit of like that added stress as well on that.
Oh, sure. Children do complicate the mix as much as we love them. They do bring stress into lives as well. So that,
and I have read that too, Lisa, that and even in heterosexual couples that it's more often the wife that files for divorce than the husband, and so that would actually kind of make sense if you just transferred that and over, that maybe we're just cut differently for whatever reason.
So maybe we shouldn't have children. That's how we save marriages. No, I'm kidding, folks. But we need help at times, right? Whatever our family makeup is, we need help. And, it's not an easy world out there. If you are having trouble in your family unit, please seek help. Please find professionals who can help you, because you don't have to go it alone. You shouldn't go it alone, no matter what you're going through in life. Parenting is hard enough. And sometimes kids really can bring additional stress to the marriage. So whatever the situation is, there are people like Jillian, like William here, who are out there ready to help you, to keep your family unit strong, or to help you separate in such a way that you don't destroy the family unit. The question that comes to mind from that is, we're trying to help families now that we're seeing a paradigm shift in the world of divorce, where people don't want these long, contentious, money-sucking, emotionally draining divorces anymore. They're looking for more amicable, peaceful, settlement-minded professionals to work with. And so is that the situation? Are LGBTQ clients looking for those kind of professionals as well, or do they tend to have more contentious divorces? Is there any literature on that? Any research?
Not that I've honestly seen, but I imagine that, yeah, like kind of the that it would be very much like, hey, how do we kind of like not make things worse? And yes, and kind of be able to settle this as, you know, kind of consensually as possible in that way, is to not have the drawing out of anything like that. And you know, Will and I, especially like kind of like with some of like our trauma-based things, know like kind of like the longer we kind of draw out like a very like kind of grieving and trauma, you know, based thing that like divorce can happen, the sooner that we can kind of get this resolved and get things like kind of moving, get into a better place, like the better. And so I think like people have kind of like noticed that, you know, this is something that like I don't want to drag on. If I've made this decision, I want to make sure that, you know, I get moving on. And especially if there's like this feeling of where divorce is comes relief in some ways. And so to be able to kind of help, yeah, with that is, you know, and not fight over the shiny boat, it seems like.
I mean, I can speak from my own, experience, just for my kind of humble experience, I guess you could say. But at this point, I've mediated, a fair amount of same-sex couples, and there's only one, knock on wood, today that has not settled in mediation. And so I think that they are just as eager as anybody to not have to go down that path where, I mean, it's so expensive and it's so just kind of unpleasant. But typically I have not seen anybody, the only same-sex couple that did not settle actually had, I thought, decent reasons for wanting to go to court. Everybody else has been great. And, I think that they're just as eager as anybody to kind of start a new chapter, I guess you could say.
Yeah, but we're seeing many families that are looking at the family unit as just a different unit after divorce, right? Two different units, and not wanting to destroy the fabric of the family, which is so important. And so, families are actually, we're seeing them go on vacation together after the divorce and such like that. And so for whatever community, we hope that people are finding a way to be peaceful and civilized, and remember that at one point they loved each other, and maybe there still is love, but to be respectful, to be mindful, to be willing to look for a peaceful route out. And, at Divorce Town, we talk about your different divorce options. We try to steer people to Peaceful Place and Savings Lane on our roadmap versus Bigger Bucks Boulevard and Duke It Out Drive. We want to keep everyone away from that side of town. And so this has been really, really interesting conversation. As we wrap up here today, are there any final comments that either one of you want to share with us? Your thoughts for today?
I have one maybe that, I don't know if this was mentioned, but I just think it's an interesting point, which is that, based on what Jillian, when we found out we were going to do this, we did kind of a deep dive into, same-sex marriages and things like that. One of the things that I think we've seen on paper, and I've seen it in experience, is that same-sex couples are more likely to seek out therapy. They're more likely to do well in therapy, and actually, apparently, they have a reputation of gaining traction very quickly when compared to other populations. So basically, meaning that they're more likely to do well in therapy, more likely to seek it, and more likely to do well in it, which I just thought was an interesting point.
That is interesting. Well, good. There's some sensibility there. It's excellent to hear that people are seeking it out, the help that they need and deserve. And so that's wonderful, that this population is looking for help and willing to do the work to make it work. Jillian, any last final words from you?
Yeah, I would say that it's even with all like the stress and like kind of the external type of thing, one of the beautiful things about LGBTQ marriages and I think is that like you get to really kind of make it your own as well. You know, there's a lot of like kind of what we call like positive marginality, where like you can you know, kind of, yeah, have two bachelorette parties or like or both get proposed to and stuff like that. And so being able to kind of like utilize things if there you know, are certain heteronormative things that you get to kind of play, get to be outside of the box, get to have more flexibility, and that can be really, really important in the relationship, to be able to be flexible and figure out what do we really want and what works for our strengths. What do we really desire? What do we really need in this relationship that doesn't necessarily fit into like the heteronormative, because we get to play around with that. And so I think it's really important for like LGBT couples to kind of give themselves permission to be like, hey, you get to have fun with it as well.
What a great way to end here. I love that. Create what makes you happy. I love that. Thank you both so much for being our guest today. This was a very provocative discussion, and we are grateful for your time and your expertise and what good you're doing in the world. Continued success with that. And so Marcella, I'm going to turn this over to you now and let you go ahead and share with folks how they can find more.
Absolutely. So we'll encourage everyone to visit us on divorcetownusa.com and also divorcemoneymatters.com. We have a lot of resources there. We also have a free support group for anyone who is looking for additional help. Actually, our dear friend Will here has helped moderate some of those meetings. So please join us for any one of those. We thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see all of you again next week, where we will be with Kathleen Shack as our guest, discussing summertime and pesky parenting plans. See you then. Thank you, everyone.